One of the profound statements, if it's understood well, is the simple statement, here we are, here I am, here you are. And to be rooted here in a deep way, to be clear that we're here. And part of the value of really being here is that in Buddhism, the word for world has two meanings. It means the wider world that we live in. But for practitioners, the world is the world that arises and spreads from our own experience. And in a sense, our world begins every day, and it begins with ourselves. That we are the origin of the world that we experience and live in. It's easy to argue against that doesn't quite make sense depending on how you mean world. But still, to appreciate that in some way that we are, if we want to live in a better world, a good place to begin is with oneself. To live good. To let the better world arise in us. If the world begins with us, then how we are is essential. And this is one of the teachings of Buddhism, how important it is to care for, pay attention to the actions, the words, even the thoughts that arise out of ourselves so that we can make a better world, beginning with ourselves. And so one of the important principles of vipassana practice is to sit mindful without conflict towards anything. And that doesn't mean that that we're passive in the world. It means when we sit to meditate, we learn that very deep place of non-conflict that teaches us, shows us where the world begins, so that when we do act, we act with what is wholesome, beneficial, helpful for ourselves and for others. So to sit here in the deepest place of non-conflict, and that means non-conflict to how we are conflicted and how we are challenged and whatever it might be. So to take a meditation posture and to think of the posture you take, that you assume, as an integral part of this world, the new world that you always are creating. And how would you want to sit? Maybe you'd want to sit with a little confidence. Maybe it would be good to evoke some sense of strength, encouragement in the value of being present here for these minutes. And to close your eyes. And as if you could reach deep inside, can you reach deep inside of you to maybe the deepest place you know, where there is peace, or if that's too high a goal, where there is non-conflict. reaching deep inside for a place of stillness or openness that is not agitated by the winds of the world. And if you cannot reach such a place inside, that's okay. But perhaps it'd be okay to imagine such a place within you. Imagine a place of abiding peace, non-conflict, a soft, fluid stillness that will be the beginning, the origin, the source of wise action in the world, wholesome action. And from this place inside, maybe allow the waves, the tides of breathing to wash across it. Maybe allowing the waves of breathing to flow out of it through your body. And as you exhale, to relax, soften, settle into, for a few minutes, just being here, with no future and no past, just here. And the important part of this non-conflict is how you are aware of things, how you're mindful. Sometimes the idea of stepping back away from it so you can see things at a distance can help the awareness just be aware without conflict. Sometimes it's coming close and being intimate with what's happening. That allows for the kindness and compassion that frees us from conflict with what is. And as we sit here, see if you can allow your attention to breathing, to allow the mindful breathing, the waves of coming and going, be continuous. As if you're being caressed or massaged or reassured with each stroke of the breath through the still place within, throughout the body, here, just here for these few minutes. perhaps to let go of whatever you're thinking, so that you can better feel, sense, intuit, maybe even imagine a place of peace within, a place where there's no conflict. That might be the beginning of the world, the beginning of the world that you create through what you say and do and think. And to sit there at that peaceful place will allow you to be wise in all that you do. As we come to the end of this sitting, one way to think about this meditation practice, and just one way of many, is to think of it as preparation for the real practice. Preparation for practice. It's the practice that prepares us to practice in the world. And that the real practice is how we act and live and speak in the world itself. And so as we come to the end of this sitting, we're really coming to the beginning of when our practice will start. And for the Buddha, at the heart of his teachings is how we act, how we live in the world. And to live with wisdom, to live doing what is wholesome and helpful and beneficial, and to have the freedom, the agency, the strength, but really the freedom, not the obligation, the freedom to always choose what is wholesome. And to avoid what is unwholesome. We might have feelings, impulses which are unwholesome, but to have the freedom to let them be, and the freedom to act on what's wholesome, so that we, if we want a better world, it begins with us, always beginning with us. Never to lose confidence that the world that you live in always begins with how you see it and understand it and how you act in it. And to have the freedom to act for a better world, for yourself, for sure. And then because you care for yourself, and then with your freedom, it's natural to care for others. May it be that flowing out of us is the desire, the wish for all beings to be happy, for all beings to be safe, for all beings to respect each other, care for each other, and for all beings to be free. And may that possibility begin with each of us every day. So, my friends, it's the task to continue with the Eightfold Path, and the topic is quite topical for our times. The first two factors of the Eightfold Path are usually considered to be wisdom factors. Some people translate the word panya, P-A-N-N-A, as discernment, the ability to discern, to see clearly what's going on here. And with wisdom comes action. And the second part of the Eightfold Path is called Sila, the S-I-L-A, usually translated in English as ethics or as virtue. But the word Sila literally means conduct, and usually understood in this context to mean virtuous conduct. Wisdom, the first two factors of the Eightfold Path, prepare us for conduct, how we act, the actions we have in the world. And there are three kinds of actions that Buddhism emphasizes. There's the actions of the body, of speech, and of the mind. And the wisdom factors begins to show us, encourages us to begin, and maybe in small baby steps at first, to begin taking responsibility to avoid the actions which are unwholesome, unhealthy, and to choose those which are healthy. Not to force ourselves, not to overlay something on top of ourselves, not to pretend exactly or to live under heavy obligation. But if we always begin with ourselves, if the world begins with us, then it begins by us looking at what is here for us. And really getting to know what's here before we act. Or to say it differently, to be mindful is the first act. And in sense, maybe we can allow the world to begin with each act of mindfulness, this simple knowing, simple recognizing what's here. And of course there's going to be all kinds of things that we do which are unwholesome, unhelpful, caught up in anger and hostility and greed and delusion, of course. As the mindfulness gets strong, we learn to see that clearly, without shame, without conflict, but to see in a certain kind of way, allow it to be there. Only in a certain kind of way. Just sit in our awareness. And then, in seeing clearly, having the wherewithal to say, nope, I don't have to get involved with that. That's there. That has arisen. I've had those thoughts. I don't have to invest in those or believe in them or go along with them. And that can be done peacefully. It can be done without conflict. It can be done without hostility, or like I said, without shame. Just know. And we can choose what's wholesome. And maybe take some reflection, some consideration to discover what's wholesome, and to discover it in a way that has integrity. Not to do it because it's a policy that we should do it. And that's why this phenomenal benefit of meditating is to discover a way of being where there's response ability, but without the burden of responsibility, in a sense of obligation. Because where the Eightfold Path is going, or what it's really about, as the goal or as the beginning, is freedom. The heart's release from all its suffering, all its constriction. So as I've been saying, there's two versions of the Eightfold Path. The version that takes us to freedom, and the version that arises from our freedom. And on the way to freedom, we learn to pay attention to all these different factors. And the first factor is to really appreciate deeply that our actions have consequences. As we begin to discover freedom, then that's where we really begin to have more and more freedom in choosing how to create our world, the world that flows out of us, and we can choose that which is wholesome. But sometimes that takes some consideration. And some kind of consideration, some kind of reflection, some kind of discernment about what is it that's helpful here, what's wholesome, what's good. And this is the second factor of the Eightfold Path, the consideration. And whatever we do, have these considerations, these concerns as part of the figuring out what to do. One is to avoid addiction to sensual pleasure, to be caught in the grip of that, to avoid ill will, and to avoid, the usual translation is cruelty. It might be that the translation is harmfulness, doing harmful things. And then to do the skillful things, the wholesome things, that's the right consideration, the appropriate consideration. So to avoid this, anyway, so I'm saying the same thing, but to avoid the renounce, in a sense, the addiction to sensual pleasures, and to avoid ill will, and to avoid cruelty. But especially these last, these are also positive sides to this. This renunciation of sensual pleasure, I think of it as a life of blessed simplicity, where there's this beautiful quality of simplicity of being that doesn't need sensual pleasure for satisfaction, for happiness, for joy, for a sense of being alive and connected. There's a deep sense of simplicity, blessed simplicity, that is a kind of a phenomenal wealth. The non-ill will is kindness and care and loving kindness. That to act with kindness, to act with friendliness, that is skillful, that is wholesome. And then the idea of non-harm or non-cruelty encompasses the worlds of compassion and care that we have, to really care for the world. And is there a way, so on the way to freedom, we understand that this kind of care for the world, kindness, friendliness, compassion, this really sets up the conditions for freedom. It sets up the conditions for growth in the Dharma. It really kind of nourishes us and supports us. And it's meant to nourish the world. Not to be involved with others, with addictions to sex, for example, which is so much suffering in our society. Not to be caught up in the addictions of alcohol, which causes so much widespread suffering in families, for generations, really. To care for our society is to avoid sensual addictions. To care for our society is to be kind and friendly. To care for our society is to be compassionate. That this right consideration is integrally connected to the actions that we are going to set in motion in the world. The second set of the Eightfold Path has all to do with action, and this is setting the stage for the quality of those actions. So we're giving consideration, what do we want to infuse our actions with? What do we want to flower and flow from our actions? What do we want the fruit of our actions to be? And the fruit, the results, the consequences in the world for our actions are a world of difference if we avoid the unwholesome and we do the wholesome, especially in our social actions. And so kindness, friendliness, loving kindness, compassion, care, to really care for others. I love the word care because of its dual meanings. It means to have kind regard, concern about something, to appreciate something. I care for something, I appreciate it, I value it. And the other meaning is to tend to fix, to repair, to heal, to do something supportive for something. I care for my family, and therefore I care for them. I I do things for them. I care for this world. And so, so the question for you is, how is it that something wonderful, blessed simplicity, blessed friendliness and kindness, blessed compassion and care, how can it arise out of your freedom, your tenderness, a place of being non-conflictive, really when you settle deeply? And maybe to answer that question, coming out of something like meditation or a walk in nature or a time when you really feel like you're at home and at peace and centered, how is it that these beautiful qualities flow from our inner non-conflict, our inner peace, our freedom? And if you have some sense that that's possible, then even when you don't feel your freedom, maybe you can discover a quality of freedom in acting on kindness and friendliness, in acting in compassion and care, in acting in being simple. To consider and act and be this way can also be a discovery of freedom. And it's important then we don't do it as an obligation and force ourselves and grit our teeth to do these things. But what do we have to let go of? What do we have to release? How do we have to open up so in a genuine way we can have blessed simplicity, we can have friendliness to our world of all people, and have compassion and care for all people in this world? And how can we be free from looking at the world around us, the wider world, and expect the wider world to be different, to expect the wider world to behave well, the wider world to provide its own answer to the ills of our society? Why give that authority away? Of course we can wish and work for that, but let the world begin with you. Let your goodness, what you most strongly believe is the best and nourishing and wholesome parts of who you are, act in ways that nourish and bring forth the best in other people as well, and out into the world. Let your goodness, let your freedom, let your wholesomeness be the beginning every day for a better world that spreads from you. So right consideration, the second factor of the Eightfold Path, is to think deeply and considerately about what is wholesome and unwholesome and act in ways that are beneficial. And that will bring us to the next step of the Eightfold Path. The next three all have to do with this action, what we do. And so this is setting the foundation. And the next two, three, they're all next, all have to do with action and how they affect the world around us. That this path of Dharma is intimately, integrally connected to making a better world, being in the world in a particular way. And that's why at the end of the meditation I said, somewhat maybe challenging, or heuristically for a particular teaching point, that meditation is the preparation for the practice. And the practice begins as we leave our meditation and are out in the world. So thank you. May you take very good care of yourself and just take really good care of yourself today and this week in all kinds of ways. And if you have this practice, you will find your way. It might take a while, but you will find your way. Thank you.